There's around 45 suspected terrorists in this room.
I don't think it's just Disney. I think it's all over. Rent, food, everything else is going up, but wages are not.
Fuck him up! Fuck him up!
Israel retaliated after what it said was an Iranian rocket strike toward the Golan Heights yesterday.
I
have every right to call the police and not sleep in that room.
A black student was sleeping in her Yale dorm's common room, and a white student decided to call the cops on her. It's the latest in a string of white fright moments caught on video. The FEC ruled that childcare can be considered a legitimate campaign expense. The decision removes a major hurdle for parents running or hoping to run for office. Malaysia's old prime minister is its new prime minister. Returning to office at age 92, Mahathir Mohamad is also the world's oldest elected leader. When he was born in 1925, the country was under British rule. Spotify has removed R. Kelly and XXXTentacion from its playlist as part of its new policy on hate content and hateful conduct. The ban is a big deal. Spotify's Rap Caviar playlist alone has 9.5 million listeners.
85 meters southwest of U.S.
This isn't a video game. It's the military's recreation of the deadly ambush in Niger last October. The Pentagon's final report doesn't pin the blame on any particular mistake, though it identifies plenty of them.
And continued to engage the enemy until both were fatally wounded.
The meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un will go down on June 12th in Singapore, according to a presidential tweet. Just hours before the announcement, North Korea freed 3 American hostages.
It was nice letting them go before the meeting. I mean, frankly, we didn't think this was going to happen.
The release is a clear sign of the North's goodwill with the critical summit approaching. But American hostages being held in other parts of the world probably won't be so lucky.
Historically, the U.S. government doesn't like to talk about hostages until they come home. The State Department doesn't publish details about where hostages are being held abroad, and they wouldn't confirm to me the exact number of American hostages either. But news reports, public statements from hostages' families, and hints from the government suggest we still have hostages in at least 7 other countries. They include at least 6 in Iran, 2 in Turkey, 2 in Afghanistan, and 1 each in Mali, Yemen, Syria, and Venezuela. International law defines hostage-taking as seizing, or detaining and threatening to kill or injure a person, to force another nation to do something as a condition of the person's release. It's that last part that's critical, and it means that for most US hostages, there's no clear path to get them home. I spoke to former New Mexico Governor and UN Ambassador Bill Richardson, who's been involved in a lot of hostage negotiations, particularly in North Korea. He said in a place like Venezuela or Syria, the US doesn't have a lot that it's willing to offer in exchange for bringing our citizens home.
We have hostages all over the world. We have a number of other hostages in Syria and the Middle East with rogue countries, but we're not talking to them directly. We're talking to them indirectly through third parties. In many cases, these countries are demanding ransoms, and then we don't have relationships with ISIS. We don't have relationships with the Syrian government. It depends on just the geopolitical situation at the time, if it's convenient for a negotiation to happen. But you can't put your finger on it when it happens. This is why some of these take years.
So when is the U.S. successful at bringing Americans home?
When it's in the interest of both parties to reach a settlement, that's one. When it's no longer useful for the country to have the hostages.
Iraqis are getting ready to vote on Saturday, in the first national election since ISIS was defeated last year. A record number of candidates are running, In Mosul alone, which ISIS once claimed as its capital, more than 900 candidates are vying for 31 seats in parliament. And the issue everyone's talking about is security. Even though life in eastern Mosul is mostly returned to normal, ISIS is still issuing threats and pledging to attack voters.
والكرة الكبير انت هنا الأولى انت هنا الأولى انت وهذا العينتين انت من السرخلة ولا عاجو.
Major Mezher heads the Sulmer police station in the east of the city, and he isn't exactly known for his positive reinforcement.
هي أثناء دوام رسمي أريد الوحدة قوية نشطة أريدها نار.
He's been in the force since 2002, during Saddam's reign. He eventually moved up to the SWAT unit, and during the offensive against ISIS in 2016, he trained officers how to fight against the militants. Major Mezher coordinates with other security forces in the city in order to gather intelligence and capture any fighters who are still here. Much of the data is kept in handwritten logs. كتاب شن هي؟
هذا عناوينهم سجل عناوينهم واسمائهم واسماء والدهم اللي انتموا لها.
سجل
عوائل دواعش 2018
هذه السنة.
نعم.
وشو تسجلون؟
نسجل اسمائهم معلومات عنهم وصورهم.
These days, he mostly fields questions from local residents about ISIS. This woman came to tell Major Mezher that her son was taken away by the army.
والله بيت من امامه بالسلام قاعد عندهم بيتهم ما قاعد ينظف بيه شجت لها مر طبقت على الباب.
ابنك داعشي وهاي المعلومات من حميدات ليش تقولين ابني مو داعشي؟
والله انا اعرفه مو داعشي.
لا داعشي.
ها؟
حميدات.
ايه.
اهل المنطقة يقولون ابنك كلب ابن كلب هم يقولون.
والله تحطني قدام لو اعرف ابني داعشي وكلب ابن كلب فانا اجي ادور عليه.
The war against ISIS is officially over. But in Mosul, soldiers and police officers are still battling to remove the last remnants of the group from the city. Where does the vast majority of your intelligence come from? Does it come from the people or do you have other sources as well?
لا من المدنيين. أغلب معلوماتنا احنا اليوم بالوقت الحاضر تجينا من الأهالي. الأهالي اليوم رفضوا بشكل قاطع وجود داعش أو فكر داعش أو وجود داعش أصلاً. يعني وصلت بعض الحالات إنه يبلغون عن أقاربهم اللي انتموا لداعش. يعني مرة من المرات واحدة بلغت على والدها قالت هذا كان ينتمي لتنظيم داعش.
Police captured this ISIS suspect after getting a tip from residents who claimed that when ISIS had control of the city, they saw him dressed like the militants and carrying a walkie-talkie that only ISIS would use. He's one of an estimated 19,000 suspected terrorists detained in police stations and prisons across the country. 3,000 of them are thought to be on death row.
خليجي فتشوا وحطوا جوا.
قد بايعت لا شايفيك لا بتبغاني وشايفك لا
شايفيني
شايفيك
وين ما تيجي هاي.
Later in the day, away from the police officers, we managed to speak to him privately.
يقولون انت داعشي صح لو لا؟ ليش يقولون انت داعشي لا انت مو داعشي؟
الناس اللي ما تخاف منها كثير ناس تخاف منها.
There's another cell at the police station, where around 45 suspected terrorists were being held. Some had spent more than 4 months in this room awaiting trial.
Do you think that it's okay to be keeping a large number of men in such a small place?
وكان اكو مراكز رسمية وسجونها أكبر وسجونها أفضل، لكن هم نفسهم ذولا من انتموا لهذا التنظيم دمروا كل المراكز والمراكز الأمنية ومراكز الشرطة.
How do you respond to human rights organisations who say that the conditions that these men are being kept in is not according to international law?
أولاً هم كل العالم يعتبرون عصابة خارجة عن القانون وتنظيم إرهابي، فهم المفروض أنه أي منظمة حقوقية تجي لهم ما تنظر إليهم كإنسان لأنهم مو بشر، تصرفاتهم مو بشر.
Officers later told us they used tactics such as tying the prisoners up and denying them food in order to obtain a confession. Major Mezher claims that a zero-tolerance approach is keeping Mosul safer. But human rights groups argue that the mistreatment of suspects and the lack of due process undermines the justice system and alienates communities once more. It's taken just 48 hours for this suspect to have his first day in court, but it will likely be months before his trial begins.
يلا نظف مكانك تعلم عن نظافة زين.
منين حالي يروح الاستخبارات هم عندهم مصادر وطرق تحقيق أخرى تختلف جذريا عنه، يتأكدون 100% داعش من عدمه من خلال المسح الميداني المحل سكناه والمحل عمله. ما أنا قلت لك هو جهاز الاستخبارات عنده فروع عنده مكاتب مختصة بهذا الشغل.
The man in the cell says that he's innocent, that he's not a member of ISIS. Are you 100% convinced that he'll get a fair trial?
أكيد ولو هم كلهم كذابين سبلة بس عادي راح يتعرض لمحاكمة عادلة ما حد ما يعمله.
Disneyland is supposed to be the happiest place on earth, but for the people who work there, it's not so simple. The problem is that Anaheim has become one of the country's most expensive places to live, and wages haven't kept up. Workers say they know exactly where to put the blame: Disney, the city's largest employer.
We have been in contract negotiations with Disney in the past. In fact, the last negotiations included a protracted dispute of 4 years, where we held work stoppages, hunger strikes, and so we saw that it is very difficult to bargain with Disney. And in fact, we've seen our wages depressed.
And that's because wages aren't keeping up with inflation?
That's correct. But the political power that they have and the political will that they had was very difficult for us to beat them back.
And so our new total is $10,907.
Negotiations broke down in February when Disney offered a 3% raise over 3 years and the union walked away. So now they've taken a different tack, collecting signatures for a ballot measure that would raise the minimum wage for the city's hospitality workers at Anaheim's largest resorts to $15 an hour, and would then increase wages annually until they reached $18 an hour by 2022. Glendana Shevlin was one of a couple dozen union members knocking on doors throughout the city last month.
My name's Glendana, and I'm a Disney worker. Oh yeah, the top part, it basically, that's what it, so you know how they take a lot of tax-free money from? I think
you need to change your pen.
I have another pen, sweetie. I'm always equipped. I turned 30 years at Disneyland this year, and one of my longtime guests gave it to me as a gift. So I love this piece very much. But I work in this beautiful room up in the Venture Tower, and the windows up at the Venture Tower that overlook downtown Disney, and we have the best view in town of fireworks.
What do you love about your job?
I work the 2 to 10 shift, so we have 4 meal periods that happen. We have breakfast in the morning. We put out a beautiful spread like salmon, prosciutto, Mickey waffles, and then in the afternoon we serve 3 appetizers, such things like mushroom ratatouille, which I guess is really good. So it's like a party every night in my own house.
Disney works hard to keep the park magical for visitors and to keep the company profitable for shareholders. At 58 years old, Glendana feels the magic too. And what Disney offers her is a job. But at $15.70 per hour, she says they don't pay her enough to live in Orange County. She rents a room from a friend and keeps the rest of her possessions in a storage locker.
It's the only bad thing about not having your own refrigerator, because you have to hunt around for everything. Now, Sally likes to share some of my lunch. Yeah, she's talking to me.
Do you ever find yourself hungry at work?
Yes.
And is it tough because you're serving food?
Yes. It's like you want to cheat and eat the food, but we're not allowed to do so. I just say to myself that lunch will be soon, and then I'll do what I have to do.
Disney, which is an investor in Vice, wouldn't speak to us on camera. But in a statement, the company said its starting rates range from $11 an hour to $17.75 an hour, amounts in line with market averages. A union-sponsored survey of Disney's employees found that among 5,000 respondents, nearly 80% of them said they are proud of their work, but 73% say they don't earn enough to cover basic expenses. But Disney says the survey was unscientific and not representative of its 30,000-member workforce. The company is co-sponsoring the opposition to the ballot measure through a group called No on the Anaheim Job Killer Initiative, which is a project of the Anaheim Chamber of Commerce.
I can tell you there's groups that are looking at Anaheim. They think twice before investing in the marketplace when there's challenges like this.
So this bill is like a big sign saying do not do business in Anaheim, basically.
Absolutely. If this becomes the policy of how Anaheim operates, it's a very dangerous precedent, a huge, huge slippery slope for us to attract investment.
What about wages, though? Because essentially for a lot of people, they've seen maybe a 40-cent or 50-cent raise since the recession, basically. Can you understand if they were for 20 years rolling along and then hit the stagnation, how that feels like they're losing money?
When somebody's in a position and decide to stay in the position, nobody locks them in that job. So if they're unhappy with the progress they're making in that specific job or in that company, their choice is to go look in the free market and find another job. And for those that want to improve, reach out to your company, say, I'd like more training, I'd like the opportunity.
But if they're 58 years old, what kind of training are they going to get?
Well, that's a decision that they've made. And so where is it the responsibility of the employer to cover that? Their job is to provide a job.
Disney offers Disney University classes to thousands of its employees, which the company says makes them more marketable job candidates. Glendana tried management training more than a decade ago. At her age, she isn't interested in more classes, and she doesn't have time to wait for better wages in future contracts. What do you say when they say just change jobs, just do something else?
Well, I have tried. Right now, I don't think it's just Disney. I think it's all over. Corporations are not paying rent, food, everything else is going up, but wages are not. So I have tried to look for another job, but I have fun at my job. I love my job, and I have long-term relationships there. 30 years I given Disney smiles and made the magic. Why should I change?
Today, House Democrats released the entirety of the more than 3,500 Facebook ads bought by the Russian-backed Internet Research Agency, or IRA, between early 2015 and late 2017. Of the 20 most wide-reaching ads, 11 encouraged activism by minority groups, and 9 highlighted right-leaning political issues. The most popular IRA ad, placed in October 2016, was seen more than 1.3 million times, and the Russians spent $1,751 to promote it. They got 73,000 clicks for that. The second most popular ad, for a Facebook page called Brown Power, was seen almost 1 million times. The Russians spent $959 to promote it, and it was clicked 56,000 times.
Mark Zuckerberg first apologized last year for allowing Russians to use Facebook in its attempts to influence the US presidential election. And since then, the company has introduced a bunch of new measures to increase transparency in political ads and to block malicious actors from ever posting ads on the site. Today, if the IRA tried to post the same ads, Facebook security algorithms would likely identify their accounts as fake. Those algorithms use data like the location and time the account was created, its activity, and a whole other host of data points to determine if it's real or not. The company says it now removes millions of fake accounts every day. And even if those automated measures failed, political advertisers on Facebook now have to verify their identity, and that could keep a Russian troll out.
The Russian MO is always to target our weakest points in society. And when I say our, I just mean collectively the West. They've done this for over 10 years in Central and Eastern Europe if you're talking about like modern Russian influence campaigns. And they always target the places where there's distrust in society or where people have some sort of grievance toward groups in power, whether that's the government or big business. They know they can kind of exploit this trust gap in order to sow more distrust in the government and kind of just confusion overall.
All of Facebook's new measures sound great, but in a statement today, Facebook admitted the problem will never actually be fully solved because, quote, we're up against determined, creative, and well-funded adversaries. The 3,500 ads targeted specific interest groups, like Bill O'Reilly fans, those people who liked Redneck Nation, and users the Facebook ad platform identified as having, quote, African-American affinity. That system, to target ads based on the data Facebook collects about you, is the exact thing bad actors can take advantage of. And it's also Facebook's entire business model.
can do this!
Lucio one, thanks.
Remember, we want to keep up this pressure. We're doing really good.
No, we can push. Right bubble. Tree behind.
Let's get swish. Fuck him up.
Okay, we got to back out. We lost some.
So welcome to Harrisburg University. Today, we have this idea of becoming a world-class science and technology university. We celebrate being geeks. For us, esports is not something that is done, in a converted closet somewhere. Esports is front and center of everything we're going to do moving forward. We've already started positioning the city of Harrisburg as kind of the hub of esports in this part of the world.
Esports is projected to be a $1 billion industry by next year. It hasn't quite caught on at the college sports level, though. Only about 60 schools in the US have varsity-level teams. But recently, the NCAA has been considering getting involved in esports. And before that happens, Harrisburg wants to establish themselves as the powerhouse school.
Over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've held online tryouts, hundreds and hundreds of players, and out of those hundreds, we picked 35 and flew them to Harrisburg to get 35 down to 16, which is going to be the number of full scholarships we award and the number of players on the 3 varsity teams.
How much money has University of Harrisburg put into this whole esports initiative?
Before even the first match happens in September, we will have spent somewhere between $2.5 and $3 million.
Y'all putting a lot of money into this.
We're serious about this. Yes, we are.
And so are the recruits. In between the standard admissions Q&A and the campus tour, prospective students are put through final tryouts for games like Overwatch and League of Legends. The tryouts span 5 hours, and prospects play with and against each other, competing for a full ride that's worth nearly $24,000, with an additional stipend for room and board.
Yeah, so if everybody's clear on the plan, if there's anything that goes wrong, just default to me telling you what to do. I'm pretty good at that.
What made you want to come here?
To Harrisburg? I'm 18, I'm in high school. I wasn't gonna really go to college anyways. It's the kind of thing that's like, this door opened for me, I'm not just gonna let it close.
How do you think you'll balance your responsibilities as an athlete with school?
Horribly. Honestly, I don't think I'll be very good at it, but I'm gonna try my best. I work, I don't work very well in like in a normal school environment, but I hope that when I go to college, it's gonna be better. I hope.
All right, so we're gonna put the teams together.
In tryouts leading up to this event, head coach Jeff Wang and program director Chad Smeltz looked at hundreds of hours of game footage and spent weeks poring over gameplay data, kind of like an esports version of Moneyball.
It's one thing to be able to look at their footage, and then it's another to be able to see their mannerisms in game, how they interact, how they take losses. There's some people who just like throw their headset down when they lose.
One thing that really fascinates me is y'all have a really interesting spread of recruits here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot of diversity, variety, personality. It's all across the board. Like you'll meet all types of people in esports.
No women here.
No, actually. So that's one of the things that we were talking about is that we had a lot of women in the tryout, both for League of Legends, Overwatch, and Hearthstone. And we're trying to find the top of the top. And right now, none of the women made that next cut. And I think one of the biggest reasons is that culturally, it's not accepted as much for them to be playing games, at least 10, 15 years ago as they were growing up.
I think y'all are poised to be at the forefront of this, which means that there will be a lot of people looking at this school. And, if there's women on the team, or if there's not women on the team, that's going to kind of shape what, little boys, little girls think about esports in general.
So in the professional scene, and it's been around for 5 to 10 years, they just had the first female Overwatch player, just literally a month ago, join the team ever. So there's definitely that stigma, but the cool thing is that when you see them for the first time, there's so many little kids, both boys and girls, that look up to that, and they're like, wow, that's really cool, anybody can do that. And you start seeing that slow shift in culture and change, and that's what we want to include here too. We gotta be really careful here.
Send us one. There's a junk.
If you can do well in the tryouts, your chances of getting a scholarship are pretty good. But the final test is a one-on-one with the coaches.
How's your academic history in the past?
My academic history hasn't been great, but everything that I've been doing recently has definitely pointed me in a better direction. I had a lot of anger problems when I was a child, when I was very, very young. I got into fights at the schoolyard.
Did that ever carry over into esports when you were playing contenders or anything like that?
In the early days, yeah.
How did you adjust around it then?
I've been taking therapy courses. And I've been on medication. I sometimes come across as too blunt, and that seems like I'm being mean.
A few days after his tryout, Gunther finally got a phone call with the news he was waiting for: a full-ride scholarship to Harrisburg University.
People don't know what structure players need. They might know the game and they might be able to tell players, hey, do this in game, but being able to manage the relationships of the players is now something that's really kind of coming to the forefront in North America.
We're giving them stability to do what they want on the game side and education-wise, and then just continuing to raise that bar, because as they get used to it, we can work a lot with them on doing other things. So it's just one step at a time for them and being able to get them through that process.
Let's fucking go!
Wine, of course, is probably the most expensive crop in the entire world, and it's a crop that is very sensitive to climate.
The industry here is sort of in crisis mode. Varieties that we see on wine bottles may not exist in 30 years.
Nous ne savons pas encore exactement, mais nous pensons que nous avons perdu entre 40 et 50% de la récolte.
C'est 100 000 bouteilles qui sont parties dans un espace de quelques minutes.